Michelle Rajas, and this is your daily news. Today we'll be talking about the Vietnam War. On January 31st, 1968, the Vietnam War took place. This was due to the Tet Offensive holiday in Vietnam. The Vietnamese conducted a series of attacks on hundreds of cities in Vietnam. General Vo Nguyen Grab, communist leader, was behind these attacks. His purpose was to cause a rebellion between North and South Vietnam and to encourage the U.S. to scale back support of the siege on the regime. The U.S. sadly had to withdraw from the region, which was a disappointment since Vietnam was a communist country. And now with Marlene with the Cuban Missile Crisis.
For the Cuban Missile Crisis, missiles were secretly shipped to Cuba and construction began to make them operational. In October of 1962, an American U-2 aircraft noticed the missiles in Cuba and the CIA informed the president the next morning in Washington, D.C. The media remained ballistic missiles had the ability to launch as far as D.C. The long-range ballistic missiles had reached almost all of the countries in the United States. A U.S. Navy ship dropped warning death charges at a Soviet submarine at the blockage line. The sub was armed with nuclear torpedoes, but thankfully chose not to fire them. A U.S. plane was also chased out of Kamchatka by MiGs and the unauthorized mission. World War III was so close to happening. Thankfully, by the evening, the Soviets and the Americans finally came to an agreement. They would remove the missiles from Cuba, Italy, and Turkey. The United States also pledged to leave Cuba alone. Months after the crisis, the Jupiter missiles were dismantled, also announced to the public that it was because of the crisis in Cuba.
And back to my report on the Berlin Wall. On August 12th through 13 of 1961, we have seen soldiers lay down more than 30 miles of barbed wire through the heart of Berlin. You might ask why the separation is coming amongst us, and it's because our difference of thoughts between democratic and communist. Many people have been seen trying to climb this wall in order to get to the West, which is a democratic. President Truman saw this and thought that something should be done. The Berlin airlift has been a way that food has been flown into the people in the West, and since they cannot get their hands on other supplies. This wall is still remaining, and we will see what will happen.
The My Lai Masquerade. In March 1968, the U.S. troops went to My Lai, Vietnam, and about 500 people, including women, children, and elderly, were killed. This was covered up by higher-ranking U.S. Army officers managed to cover up this event. About 14 Army officers were charged.
Bay of Pigs started off with Kennedy making a plan to train Cuban exiles to fight against their country. This event took place on the south coast of Cuba in the Bay of Pigs. The main people who were involved were Fidel Castro and John F. Kennedy. This mainly happened due to the fact that the U.S. government did not trust Fidel and knew about his relationship with Nikita Khrushchev. In the end, the Cuban Missile Crisis inflamed American-Cuban-Soviet tensions even further.
On to counterculture. As more and more children of middle-class Americans entered college, many rejected the suburban comforty designed by their parents, shown new attitudes about drugs and sex, communal lifestyles, and innovations in food, fashion, and music. The contribution youth of the 1960s. The sexual revolution was in full swing on American college campuses. Birth controls and the rejection of traditional views of sexuality led to more casual attitudes towards sex. Marijuana and LSD were used most commonly, but experimentation with mushrooms and pills were common as well. Vegetarianism became popular among many youth. Long hair on young men were standards as well as afros. Women often wore flowers in their hairs. The common bonds among many youth of the time was music. Bonds like the Great Dead, Jefferson's Airplane, and the Doors created new sounds for electrical enhanced guitars, subverbs, lyrics, and associated with drugs. It is important to note that the counterculture was probably no more than 10% of the American youth population. Young, educated people actually supported the war in Vietnam in great numbers than older, uneducated Americans. The counterculture was simply so outrageous that the media made the numbers seem larger than in reality.
And now an update on the space race. Ever since World War II ended, we have seen an advance in technology. Now we are in a race to see what country could develop a figure to go into space. Sadly, the US was not the first to launch something into space. Russia launched Sputnik on June 4th, 1958. Sputnik was an aluminum sphere 23 inches in diameter with far steel antenna emitting radio signals. Very impressive, right? Now we are fearing that this advanced technology might pose a threat to American soil. However, there's no need to panic because there have been rumors speculating that the US has caught up to their technology.
In other news, the Gulf of Tonkin. During the spring of 1964, the military planners developed a design to attack on North Vietnam. On August 22, the U.S. was fired on the North Vietnamese torpedo boats. By the summer, the rebel forces had established control over nearly half of South Vietnam.
That was it for today's Daily News. Tune in next time. Go.
Right now?
Yeah.
What was my topic?
In October of 1962, an American U-2 aircraft noticed the missiles in Cuba, and the CIA.
The Melee Masquerade was about the 1960s and was...
Hello, my name is Giselle Barajas, and this is your Daily News. Today, we will be talking about the Vietnam War. It was on January 31st, 1968. Go, cut it.